The autumn wind carried the scent of pine and earth as Devin Vaughn rode his dappled gray stallion down the winding trail toward Silver Creek. His weathered leather vest and trail-worn boots spoke of a man who'd spent his 32 years chasing horizons across the untamed West. But the weariness in his blue eyes told of a different journey, one that had led him nowhere. Silver Creek, Wyoming Territory, 1878. Just another dusty town in a string of places that had failed to feel like home since the war ended. 13 years of drifting had hardened the former Union cavalry scout into a man of few words, taking odd jobs as he moved west ranch hand, stage coach guard, and lately, bounty hunter. Not the life he'd envisioned as a young man in Pennsylvania, but the war had changed everything. The late September sun cast long shadows as he approached the small homestead on the outskirts of town. Smoke curled from the chimney of the modest cabin, and chickens scratched in the yard. Devin had come on business. The town marshal had mentioned a widow on the edge of town who needed help with her land, and Devin needed work before winter set in. As he approached, he noticed a woman sitting on the front porch, her honey-brown hair gathered in a simple knot at her nape. She was bent over what looked like papers in her lap, so engrossed she hadn't noticed his approach. He cleared his throat as he dismounted, not wanting to startle her. Julia Keller's head snapped up, her eyes wide with momentary alarm before she hurriedly gathered the papers in her lap. Letters, Devin realized, old ones from the look of the yellowed paper and faded ink. Her eyes, a striking amber color, were rimmed with red. She'd been crying. "Forgive me, madam," he said, removing his hat. "Marshal Thompson in town said you might be looking for help with your place." Julia stood quickly, tucking the letters into her apron pocket. She was younger than he'd expected, perhaps 26 or 27, with a quiet dignity in the way she carried herself despite the obvious signs of grief. "Yes," she said, straightening her simple blue dress. "Though I wasn't expecting anyone today." She studied him warily, taking in his trail-worn appearance and the revolver holstered at his hip. "Devin Vaughn, madam," he offered, giving a slight nod. "Just rode in from Cheyenne. I do honest work, ranching, carpentry, whatever needs doing." He gestured toward the sagging fence and the barn with its listing door. "Looks like you could use an extra pair of hands before winter hits." Julia's gaze swept over her small homestead, seeming to see it through his eyes: the neglected fence, the garden gone half to weeds, the loose shingles on the roof. Her shoulders straightened with determination, but Devin could see the exhaustion beneath. "My husband's been gone 8 months now," she said quietly. "Pneumonia took him last winter. I've managed, but—" Her voice trailed off as she looked toward the unplowed western field. "I understand, Mrs. Keller. You know my name," her eyebrows raised slightly. "Marshall mentioned it," he explained. "Said you've been keeping this place going on your own since your husband passed. That takes grit." A ghost of a smile touched her lips. "Thomas always said I was stubborn." Her fingers absently touched the letters in her pocket. "I'm trying to be practical now. Winter's coming and there's too much I can't manage alone." Devin nodded, his eyes drifting to where her fingers rested on the pocket containing the letters. Something about her vulnerability in that moment, the widow reading old letters, clinging to memories while facing an uncertain future alone, stirred something long dormant in his chest. "I can repair that fence and get your barn door right before sunset," he offered. "We can discuss terms after if you're satisfied with my work." She hesitated only briefly. "Very well, Mr. Vaughn, there are tools in the barn." As Julia turned to go inside, a letter slipped from her pocket, landing on the porch boards. Devin bent to retrieve it, catching a glimpse of flowing script and words of tender affection before he handed it back. Their fingers brushed as she took it, and something passed between them, a moment of understanding perhaps. She clutched the letter to her chest, eyes downcast. "These letters," Devin said softly, "they're what keep him with you." She nodded, unable to speak for a moment. "They're all I have left," she finally managed. "Thomas wrote to me every day during the war. I was just 18 when he left. Sometimes I read them to remember his voice." Devin looked at her standing there, pride and sorrow battling in her features, and the words came before he could think better of them. Perhaps someday, madam, you might be ready to write new ones together, with someone who understands what it means to cherish memories while still facing forward. Her eyes widened, surprise replacing grief for a fleeting moment. Then she gave a small nod, neither accepting nor rejecting the sentiment that hung in the air between them. "The tools are where I said, Mr. Vaughn. I'll have supper ready at sundown if you're still working." With that, she disappeared inside, the screen door closing softly behind her. Devin stood for a moment, wondering what had possessed him to speak so boldly to a woman he'd just met. But as he headed toward the barn, he felt something unfamiliar, a sense of possibility he hadn't experienced in years. Perhaps Silver Creek wouldn't be just another stop on his endless journey after all. The barn door protested with a screech as Devin pulled it open. Inside, dust motes danced in the shafts of sunlight that broke through the worn slats of the walls. The scent of hay and old leather filled his nostrils, a comforting smell that reminded him of simpler days on his father's farm before the war called him away. The tools hung neatly on the far wall, a testament to Thomas Keller's orderliness. A man who kept his tools well maintained was a man who cared about building things to last. Devin ran his fingers over the smooth hickory handle of a hammer, wondering about the man whose widow now faced winter alone. He worked steadily through the afternoon, mending the fence with practiced efficiency. The physical labor felt good after days in the saddle, and he lost himself in the rhythm of work. Occasionally, he caught glimpses of Julia through the windows moving about her kitchen, hanging laundry in the yard, once pausing to watch him before quickly turning away when he looked up. As promised, the fence was mended and the barn door rehung properly before the sun dipped below the horizon. Devin washed at the pump, the cold water refreshing against his skin as he scrubbed away the day's dirt. He was drying his face when Julia appeared at the door. "Supper's ready, Mr. Vaughn," she called, her voice carrying across the yard. "Nothing fancy, I'm afraid." The cabin's interior was modest but welcoming, with simple furnishings and touches that spoke of a woman's care curtains at the windows, a quilt draped over the rocking chair, wildflowers in a jar on the table. The aroma of beef stew filled the small space, making Devin's stomach rumble appreciatively. "Haven't had a home-cooked meal in longer than I care to admit," he said as she ladled stew into a bowl for him. "Been living on trail food and whatever passes for cooking in saloon kitchens." "You've been traveling a while then?" Julia asked, seating herself across from him. Devin nodded, breaking a piece of cornbread. "Since the war, more or less. Came west with the idea that I might find something worth stopping for." He paused, tasting the stew. "This is mighty good, Mrs. Keller." "Thank you." Her eyes remained on her own bowl. "And what have you found in your travels, Mr. Vaughn?" He considered the question, chewing thoughtfully. "Mostly that running from memories doesn't make them fade any faster." The admission surprised him. It wasn't something he typically shared with strangers. Julia looked up then, meeting his gaze. "No," she agreed softly. "It doesn't." They ate in companionable silence for a few minutes before Devin spoke again. "Your husband, Thomas, he was a farmer." "He was," she nodded. "Came out here from Ohio in '68, right after we married. I was 19, he was 23, full of dreams about building something of our own." Her voice held warmth as she spoke of him. "We had a good 10 years together, not enough, but good ones. No children." Devin asked, then immediately regretted the question as pain flashed across her face. "We lost a baby girl in '71, she said quietly, "and after that, it just never happened again." "I'm sorry," he said sincerely. "That's a hard thing." Julia nodded, then deliberately changed the subject. "I saw you fixed more than just the fence and barn door. The chicken coop looks sound again, and you've reinforced the well housing." "Figured I might as well while I was at it," Devin replied. "Winter in Wyoming territory doesn't forgive poor preparations." "You know something about Wyoming winters?" Spent one near Laramie a few years back. Nearly froze to death in a line shack during a blizzard. Taught me respect for the season. He finished his stew and set his spoon down. "Your place will need more work before the snow flies. The roof needs attention, and that western field should be plowed under before the ground freezes." Julia sighed, pushing away her half-finished bowl. "I know. I've been trying to hire help from town, but good workers are scarce with the railroad hiring every able-bodied man. She looked at him directly. What are your terms, Mr. Vaughn, for staying on through the preparations for winter? Devin considered. He hadn't planned to stay in Silver Creek beyond a few days, but something about this woman's quiet courage and the peaceful homestead called to him. Room and board plus $10 a month, he said finally. And I'll need some time occasionally to handle other business. Her eyebrows rose. That's far less than the going rate. Maybe, he acknowledged, but I get a roof over my head and decent meals through the winter. Seems fair to me. Julia studied him, wariness returning to her expression. Why would you offer such terms? You're clearly capable of earning more. Devin met her gaze steadily. Truth is, Mrs. Keller, I'm tired of drifting. Might be nice to stay in one place for a spell, do work that matters to someone. He paused. Besides, a woman alone faces certain challenges. Having a man around the place might discourage trouble. Understanding dawned in her eyes. She'd surely faced unwanted attention as a widow with property. Very well, Mr. Vaughn, through the winter then. She extended her hand and they shook on it formally. As they cleared the table together, Devin noticed the letters had been placed on a small writing desk in the corner. Julia followed his gaze and colored slightly. I read them every night, she admitted, like prayers. Words have power, Devin said. They can keep memories alive when everything else fades. Julia looked at him curiously. You speak like a man who's known loss, Mr. Vaughn. Most everyone has one way or another, he replied, deliberately vague. And since we'll be sharing quarters for the winter, perhaps you'd call me Devin. Devin, she repeated, testing the name. And I'm Julia, though I suppose you already knew that too. Later, as Devin settled onto the narrow cot in the lean-to off the barn that would serve as his quarters, he found himself thinking about Julia Keller and her letters. He'd spoken true words to her on the porch someday. She might be ready to write new ones, to create new memories alongside the treasured old ones. What he hadn't said was that he hoped he might be the one to help her do that. The thought startled him. He'd avoided attachments for years, preferring the simplicity of drifting. Yet here he was, contemplating staying beyond winter, wondering about a future that included the quiet-spoken widow with amber eyes who read love letters on her porch at sunset. Dawn broke cold and clear the next morning. Devin rose before the sun, stoking the small stove in his quarters before heading to the main house. Smoke already rose from the chimney, and lamplight glowed in the kitchen window. Julia was an early riser, too. She greeted him with coffee and biscuits fresh from the oven. I thought we might ride into town today, she said, spreading preserves on a biscuit. I need supplies, and you should meet a few people if you're staying on. Devin nodded, savoring the strong coffee. Town sounds fine. I'll hitch up the wagon after breakfast. Silver Creek was a small but growing settlement, one main street with the usual establishments. General store, saloon, blacksmith, small church, and marshal's office. A newly constructed schoolhouse suggested the town was establishing deeper roots than many of the temporary boomtowns that sprang up and disappeared across the West. As they drove down the dusty main street, Julia pointed out various businesses. The general store is owned by Hiram Walker. He's fair with his prices and will extend credit when harvests are late. The saloon. She hesitated, then continued with slight disapproval. The Lucky Strike belongs to Clint Barton. Not a place for decent folk, but he does bring in the latest news with the liquor shipments. Devin noted how several men nodded respectfully to Julia as they passed, while some of the women watched with curious eyes as they noted her male companion. Small-town curiosity, he'd seen it before. At the general store, Julia was greeted warmly by the proprietor, a portly man with mutton chop whiskers. Mrs. Keller, good to see you in town. How's that garden of yours producing? Well enough, Mr. Walker. I've brought eggs to trade and I need a few things for winter preparations. She gestured to Devin. This is Mr. Vaughn. He's helping me get the place ready for winter. Hiram Walker's eyes assessed Devin shrewdly. Passing through, are you, Mr. Vaughn? Staying through winter, at least, Devin replied evenly. Mrs. Keller has offered fair terms. The storekeeper nodded slowly. Well, We're always glad for new faces in Silver Creek, especially those willing to lend a hand to neighbors in need. His emphasis on the word neighbors carried a subtle warning that Devin understood immediately. The widow was under the town's protective eye. As Julia selected her supplies, a woman in an expensive-looking blue dress entered the store, accompanied by a gentleman in an Eastern cut suit. The woman's eyes widened slightly at the sight of Julia. "Julia Keller, what a pleasant surprise," she said, her voice carrying the refined accent of someone educated back east. "We so rarely see you in town these days." Julia straightened, a polite but reserved smile appearing on her face. "Mrs. Montgomery, Mr. Montgomery, how are you both?" "Thriving, my dear, absolutely thriving," Mrs. Montgomery replied, her eyes drifting curiously to Devin. "The bank is doing wonderfully under Edward's management. We're considering building a new house on the north side of town." She paused meaningfully. "Which reminds me, have you given any more thought to our offer? Edward says the price of land will only increase as the railroad expands. You really should consider selling while the offer is good." Devin noticed how Julia's spine stiffened, though her expression remained pleasant. "My position hasn't changed, Mrs. Montgomery. The farm isn't for sale." Edward Montgomery stepped forward, his manner condescending. "Mrs. Keller, I understand your sentimental attachment to the property, but you must be practical. A woman alone cannot possibly manage such a holding. The work, the expenses, it's simply not sustainable." "I appreciate your concern," Julia replied with quiet dignity, "but as you can see, I'm not alone in my efforts. Mr. Vaughn has agreed to help me prepare for winter." The banker's eyes narrowed as he took in Devin's weathered appearance. "I see. Well, hired help is expensive, Mrs. Keller. If you find yourself in financial difficulties, do remember our offer stands." Devin stepped forward, extending his hand to Montgomery. "Devin Vaughn," he introduced himself. "Recently arrived from Cheyenne." Montgomery hesitantly shook his hand. "Edward Montgomery, Silver Creek Bank and Land Company. What brings you to our little town, Mr. Vaughn? Looking for opportunities?" "Found one," Devin replied simply. "Helping Mrs. Keller get her place ready for winter and spring planting." "Yes, well." Montgomery exchanged a look with his wife. "A temporary arrangement, I'm sure. When you're ready for more permanent prospects, do stop by the bank. We're always looking for men with initiative." After the Montgomerys moved to another part of the store, Devin turned to Julia with a raised eyebrow. "They seem mighty interested in your land." Julia sighed, selecting a bolt of sturdy fabric. "They've been trying to buy it since Thomas passed." "Edward Montgomery has grand ideas about developing Silver Creek into a major stop on the new rail line. Our farm sits on what would be prime real estate if the town expands as he envisions." "And you're not interested in selling?" Devin asked, curious about her attachment to the difficult life of a widow farmer when an easier path was available. Julia's expression softened as she looked toward the door, in the direction of her homestead beyond the town. "That land represents everything Thomas and I dreamed of building together. Every fence post, every fruit tree, every floorboard in that cabin has our story in it." Her fingers unconsciously touched her pocket where he suspected she kept at least one of the letters. "I'm not ready to give that up." Devin nodded, understanding. Some things were worth more than money, a lesson he'd learned the hard way. They completed their purchases and loaded the wagon. As they prepared to leave town, Marshall Thompson approached, his silver star catching the midday sun. "Mrs. Keller," he greeted her with a tip of his hat. "Good to see you." His eyes moved to Devin. "Vaughn, I see you found your way out to the Keller place." "Marshall," Devin acknowledged. "Mrs. Keller has hired me on through winter." Thompson's weathered face revealed nothing. "That's so." "Good to hear she'll have some help out there." He turned to Julia. "Been meaning to ride out and check on you, madam. There's been reports of rustlers working the area. Lost some cattle over at the Peterson place last week." Julia frowned. "We haven't had any trouble, but I only have the 2 milk cows and Thomas's old horse." "Even so, keep an eye out," Thompson advised. "And Vaughn, I expect you to keep those guns of yours used for proper purposes only. We run a peaceful town here." "Understood, Marshall," Devin replied evenly. The lawman clearly knew something of his background as a bounty hunter, but was choosing not to mention it specifically in front of Julia. As they drove out of town, Julia was quieter than before. Finally, she spoke. "You've had dealings with Marshal Thompson before today." It wasn't a question. Devin nodded. He knew of me from my work in Wyoming and Colorado territories. What kind of work? Her amber eyes were direct, demanding honesty. Devin considered how much to reveal. "Recently, I've tracked men wanted by the law, brought them in for the bounty." He saw her grip tighten on the reins. "You're a bounty hunter, among other things. I've cowboyed, scouted, worked freight lines. The bounty work pays better when you need quick money." Julia absorbed this information in silence for a while. "Have you killed men, Mr. Vaughn?" "Yes," he answered honestly, "during the war and a few times since when given no choice." He turned to look at her profile. "Does that change our arrangement?" She kept her eyes on the road ahead. "I suppose every man out here has violence in his past. Thomas did he fought for the Union too." After a pause, she added, "But I won't have violence on my land, Mr. Vaughn. Whatever your past, while you're under my employ, you'll be a farmer and nothing more." "Fair enough," Devin agreed. "Though if those rustlers the marshal mentioned come around, you might be glad I know how to use a gun." Julia's lips pressed together, but she nodded reluctantly. "For protection only, this is to be a peaceable home." As they crested the small rise that overlooked her homestead, Julia pulled the wagon to a halt. The afternoon sun cast a golden light over the modest cabin and surrounding fields. It wasn't much compared to some of the larger ranches in the territory, but it represented years of hard work and hope. "Thomas used to stop here every time we returned from town," she said softly. "He'd look out over what we'd built and say, 'Look there, Julia, that's our kingdom.'" Silly really for such a small place, but he was so proud of it. Her voice caught slightly. "I promised him I'd keep it going." Devin studied her profile, seeing the determination beneath her grief. "You will," he said simply, "and I'll help you." She turned to him then, really looking at him perhaps for the first time. "Why, Mr. Vaughn, why help a stranger when you could make more money elsewhere? What are you running from or toward?" The directness of her question surprised him. Most people didn't ask such things of a man in the West, where pasts were often left unexamined by mutual, tacit agreement. "Maybe I'm tired of bounties and bedrolls," he said finally. "Maybe I want to build something for a change instead of just passing through." He met her gaze steadily. "Or maybe I just want to help a woman who reads old letters on her porch at sunset, because I understand what it is to hold onto memories while life keeps moving forward." Something shifted in Julia's expression, not quite softening, but a recognition of shared experience. Without another word, she flicked the reins, and they continued down the hill toward home. The days shortened as October progressed, and Devin fell into the rhythm of farm life with surprising ease. Each morning began before dawn, feeding livestock, milking the cows, chopping wood for the ever-hungry stoves. Julia worked alongside him, her capable hands never idle as they prepared the homestead for the coming winter. They developed a comfortable routine. Breakfasts were quiet, practical affairs as they planned the day's tasks. During the daylight hours, they often worked separately, Devin repairing outbuildings or plowing the western field, Julia preserving garden harvests or mending clothes. Suppers were longer, more conversational as they gradually shared pieces of their separate journeys. Julia spoke of her childhood in Ohio, the daughter of a schoolteacher who'd valued education and sent her to a ladies' academy in Columbus. "That's where I met Thomas," she explained one evening as they shelled the last of the season's peas. "He delivered firewood to the school. My friends thought it terribly romantic, the educated young lady falling for the woodcutter's son." "Was it?" Devin asked. "Romantic?" A smile touched her lips as she recalled those days. It was. Thomas wasn't formally educated, but he was intelligent and determined. He courted me for 2 years, writing me letters even when he was just across town because he said he expressed himself better on paper. Her expression turned wistful. When he proposed, he did it with a letter 212 pages long, laying out all his dreams for our future, how we'd go west and build a life from nothing but hard work and hope. "And you said yes to that dream," Julia nodded. "I believed in him, in us." She looked around the simple cabin. And we did it too, built all this from raw land. Those first years were so hard living in a tent while we built the cabin, breaking the soil for the first crops, surviving that terrible blizzard of '69. Her voice softened, but we were happy. Even when we lost our daughter, we faced it together. Devin was quiet, respecting the weight of her memories. Finally, he asked, "What was her name, your daughter?" "Rose," Julia replied, her eyes distant. "She lived just 2 days, long enough for us to love her a lifetime's worth." On another evening, as the first snow flurries danced outside the windows, it was Devin's turn to share his past. He told her of his childhood on a small Pennsylvania farm, his father's death when he was 15, and his decision to join the Union Army at 19. "I was a scout," he explained, whittling a new handle for one of her kitchen tools as she mended socks by the fire. "Had a knack for moving quiet and reading sign. Spent most of the war behind enemy lines, gathering intelligence." "That sounds dangerous," Julia commented, looking up from her needlework. "It was," he acknowledged, "but I was good at it. Problem was, when the war ended, those skills didn't translate well to peacetime." He turned the piece of wood in his hands, examining his work. "Tried going back to farming, but everything felt small, confining, so I drifted west, took whatever jobs came my way." "And the bounty hunting," Devin's hands stilled. "That came later, after Cottonwood Springs." Something in his tone made Julia set aside her mending. "What happened at Cottonwood Springs?" He was silent for so long she thought he wouldn't answer. Finally, he spoke, his voice low. "I'd settled there, 1870, had a small horse ranch starting to take shape, even had a woman I was courting, Sarah." His jaw tightened at the memory. "One night, 3 men rode through, wanted horses, money. I was in town when they came, by the time I got back. He didn't need to finish." Julia's face had paled with understanding. "I'm sorry," she whispered. "I tracked them," he continued, his voice flat. "For 6 months across 3 territories, found each one. After that, I had a reputation. Marshals started asking for my help with other men they couldn't catch. It became a way to keep moving, to not think about what I'd lost." "And you've been running ever since," she said softly. "Like you told me that first day, running from memories that don't fade." Devin nodded, returning to his whittling. "Until now, maybe." In the comfortable silence that followed, something unspoken passed between them, a recognition of shared loss, of the parallel paths that had brought them to this quiet cabin as winter descended upon the Wyoming territory. As November arrived with its biting winds and slate-gray skies, the work of preparing for winter took on greater urgency. The root cellar was stocked with vegetables, smoked meats hung from the rafters of the storage shed, and hay was carefully stored in the barn loft for the livestock. Devin rode fence lines, checking for breaks where deep snow might allow the cattle to wander, while Julia turned her attention to making the cabin as snug as possible against the coming cold. One blustery afternoon, as Devin returned from checking the far pasture, he found Julia in Thomas's workshop behind the barn. She was struggling with a large piece of oilcloth, attempting to fashion it into a windbreak for the chicken coop. "Here, let me help," he offered, taking the unwieldy material from her hands. "Thank you," she said, brushing a stray lock of hair from her face. "I remembered Thomas had this left over from when he waterproofed the wagon cover, but it's stiffer than I expected." Together they cut and fitted the oilcloth around the vulnerable north side of the coop. As they worked, Devin became increasingly aware of Julia's proximity, the scent of lavender soap in her hair, the graceful movement of her hands, the way her brow furrowed in concentration. The realization that he found her beautiful struck him with unexpected force. "You're staring, Mr. Vaughn," she said without looking up from her work. "Devin," he corrected automatically, "and yes, I suppose I was." Julia's cheeks colored slightly, but she met his gaze steadily. "Why?" Honesty seemed the only possible response. "Because you're beautiful when you're focused on a task." He paused, then added quietly, "Thomas was a fortunate man." Something flickered in her eyes, surprise, perhaps, or a momentary confusion. "I." "Thank you," she said finally, returning her attention to the windbreak. But her movements had lost their earlier fluidity, and Devin sensed he'd disturbed the careful balance they'd established. That evening, dinner was a quieter affair than usual. Julia seemed preoccupied, responding to his comments with distracted nods. After they'd finished eating, she disappeared into her bedroom and returned with a bundle of letters tied with faded blue ribbon. "I thought you might like to read some of these," she said, placing them on the table between them. "Thomas's letters. You've been kind enough to help me preserve what he built. You should know something of the man who created it." Devin looked at the packet, understanding the significance of the gesture. "Are you certain?" Julia nodded. "I am, perhaps." She hesitated. "Perhaps it's time I learned to share him in a way, to let his words exist outside my memories." Touched by her trust, Devin carefully untied the ribbon and selected the letter on top of the stack. The paper was worn at the folds, evidence of frequent reading. The handwriting was clear and deliberate, the words of a man who took care with what he wanted to express. October 12, 1868. My dearest Julia, today I staked the boundaries of what will become our home. Standing on that rise, looking out over land that has never known plow or seed, I felt a sense of possibility that I wish you could have shared. By the time you join me in spring, I will have the cabin built and the first field cleared. I promise you won't have to endure the raw wilderness as some pioneer wives have, though I know you're strong enough to face whatever challenges come our way. I miss you with an ache that seems to deepen with each passing day. Sometimes I take out your daguerreotype and talk to it, like a madman conversing with shadows. The other men in the settlement think me strange, I'm sure, but I care nothing for their opinions. Only yours matter to me. When we are together again, I will show you the place where wildflowers bloom near the creek, purple and yellow blossoms that made me think of the dress you wore when we first danced together. I'll build our home where we can see those flowers from the window, so you'll have beauty to look upon even in this untamed country. Until spring brings you to me, I remain forever. Your devoted Thomas. Devin looked up from the letter to find Julia watching him, her expression a complex mixture of emotions. "He had a way with words," he commented, carefully refolding the letter along its well-worn creases. "He did," she agreed softly. "Though he was quiet in person, said he could only truly express his heart on paper." She reached for the letter, her fingers brushing his as she took it. "I arrived the following April. The cabin was only half finished, and we lived with a tarpaulin for one wall until summer, but he'd planted those wildflowers near the house, just as he promised." Devin glanced toward the window where darkness had erased the view of the yard, the purple and yellow ones by the front step. Julia nodded, surprised. "You noticed them?" "They're the only flowers deliberately planted near the house," he observed. "Everything else in your garden is practical vegetables, herbs." A small smile touched her lips. "Every spring, Thomas would reseed them, make sure they returned." "After he died?" Her voice caught. "This past spring, I almost couldn't bear to plant them. It seemed wrong, somehow, to continue that tradition without him, but in the end, I couldn't let them disappear." "You honored his memory by keeping them alive," Devin said. "Just as you honor him by fighting for this land." Julia's amber eyes held his for a long moment. "Yes," she said finally, "that's exactly it." She gestured toward the packet of letters. "Read another if you'd like." Devin selected another letter, this one dated 1871, after they'd lost their daughter. The paper was water-stained in places, as if tears had fallen upon it many times. "My beloved Julia, I write this sitting beside your bed as you finally sleep after so many sleepless nights. The doctor says your body is healing, but I see how your spirit remains wounded. How could it not be? Our little Rose came into our lives like the brightest of blessings, only to be taken again before we truly knew her. I have no words of wisdom that can ease this pain. I only know that I love you more fiercely now than ever before. Your strength these past weeks has humbled me. When I see you place flowers on that small grave each morning, speaking softly to our daughter as if she can hear, I am reminded of why I fell in love with you. Your capacity for love itself knows no boundaries, not even those between life and death. They say time heals all wounds. I don't know if that's true. Perhaps some wounds simply become part of us, changing who we are but not destroying us. Whatever comes, we will face it as we have faced everything together. This homestead, this dream we're building, continues. Maybe someday it will know the laughter of children again. But even if it doesn't, it will always be filled with our love. Rest now, my dear one. Tomorrow we continue living, one day at a time. With all my heart, Thomas. When Devin finished reading, he found his own vision blurred. He cleared his throat, carefully replacing the letter with the others. He loved you very deeply. Julia's eyes shimmered with unshed tears, but her voice was steady. We had no more children after Rose. We tried, but she shook her head. It wasn't to be. Thomas never complained, never made me feel that I'd failed him. He simply loved me as I was. A good man, Devin said simply. Yes, Julia gathered the letters, retying the blue ribbon with reverent hands. I think he would have liked you, Devin, your honesty, your willingness to work hard. She paused. Your kindness. The compliment warmed him in a way he hadn't expected. Thank you for sharing these with me. I understand better now what this place means to you. Julia stood, holding the packet of letters against her heart for a moment before speaking again. When you found me that first day reading these on the porch, you said something that stayed with me about writing new ones together someday. Her eyes met his, questioning. What did you mean by that? Devin chose his words carefully. I meant that memories are precious, but life continues. That someday you might find room in your heart for new joy alongside the treasured past. He hesitated. That you deserve that chance. And you, she asked quietly. After what happened in Cottonwood Springs, have you found room for new joy? The question caught him off guard, had he? He'd spent years running from the past, never allowing himself to form attachments. Yet here he was, sitting in a widow's kitchen, feeling more at peace than he had in years. I'm beginning to think it might be possible, he answered honestly. Julia nodded, a ghost of a smile touching her lips. Good night, Devin. Good night, Julia. After she retired to her bedroom, Devin sat alone at the kitchen table for a long time, listening to the wind whistle around the cabin's eaves and contemplating the strange turns of fate that had led him to this moment. The first major snowstorm hit in early December, howling out of the northwest with a fury that encased the homestead in white. For 3 days, they were confined to the cabin and barn, venturing out only to tend to the livestock and bring in more firewood from the covered stack by the door. On the afternoon of the second day, as they sat on opposite sides of the fireplace, Julia knitting, Devin cleaning his revolver, she suddenly looked up with an expression of alarm. The apple cellar, she said, setting aside her work. I forgot to check the ventilation before the storm. If snow has blocked it, the apples will rot, Devin finished for her, already standing to retrieve his coat. Where is it? Behind the smokehouse, she explained, rising to help him bundle up against the brutal cold. There's a small earthen cellar where Thomas stored the harvest from our orchard. It needs air circulation or the fruit will spoil. The wind nearly knocked Devin off his feet as he pushed through the cabin door. Snow had drifted halfway up the walls on the northwest side, and more continued to fall in swirling white sheets that limited visibility to a few yards. He trudged through thigh-deep drifts toward the smokehouse, following the barely visible path. The apple cellar was indeed in danger. Snow had completely covered the ventilation pipe that rose from the earthen mound. Devin cleared it with numbing fingers, ensuring air could flow freely. As he turned to make his way back to the cabin, a flash of movement caught his eye near the edge of the property. Squinting through the driving snow, he made out the forms of riders, 3 men on horseback at the boundary fence. Even through the storm's obscuring curtain, he could tell they weren't locals seeking shelter. Their posture, the way they studied the homestead, these were men with purpose, and likely not a benevolent one. Devin ducked behind the smokehouse, watching as the men conferred briefly before turning their mounts away, disappearing into the white haze of the blizzard. Rustlers, most likely, checking properties during the storm when residents were likely to be housebound. They'd be back when conditions improved. When he returned to the cabin, stomping snow from his boots, Julia looked up with relief. You cleared it. The apples will be safe. The apples are fine, he assured her, hanging his coat near the fire to dry, but we had visitors. Her expression shifted to concern as he described what he'd seen. Rustlers, you think, but we have so little worth stealing. 2 milk cows and a horse might not seem like much to us, but to men desperate enough to ride in this weather, they're valuable, Devin explained, accepting the cup of hot coffee she offered. And an isolated homestead with just a woman and a hired hand might seem like an easy target. Julia's jaw set with determination. This property has never been successfully robbed, not while Thomas was alive, and not since his passing either. I won't start now. Devin couldn't help but admire her spirit. We'll be ready for them, he promised. The storm will keep them away for now, but once it clears. You think they'll return? Her voice was steady, but he noticed how her fingers tightened around her own coffee cup. I do. Men like that are opportunists. They've marked this place now. He looked toward his gun belt hanging near the door. I know you don't want violence here, Julia, but I need to be prepared to protect what's yours. She followed his gaze to the revolver and nodded slowly. Do what you must, but Devin. Her eyes met his, serious and intent. Don't risk yourself unnecessarily. This land, these animals, they're just things. They can be replaced. And you, he asked quietly. Are you just going to let them take what you and Thomas built? A flash of fire lit her amber eyes. Never, but I won't have more blood shed on this soil either. Rose is buried here. Thomas too. This ground has known enough sorrow. Devin understood. I'll do my best to resolve it without gunplay, but I can't promise what desperate men might force. The storm raged through the night and into the following day, keeping them confined to the cabin. They spoke little of the potential threat, focusing instead on domestic tasks and conversation that helped distract from both the howling wind and the danger it temporarily held at bay. That evening, as they sat before the fire sharing the last of a bottle of blackberry cordial Thomas had made the previous summer, Julia unexpectedly asked, What will you do when spring comes, Devin? Will you move on as planned? The question had been increasingly on his mind as well. Their arrangement had been for the winter, only time enough to prepare the homestead for the coming year, but the thought of leaving in spring no longer sat easily with him. I haven't decided, he answered honestly. What would you want me to do? Julia stared into the flames, the firelight casting warm shadows across her face. When Thomas died, I thought my life had essentially ended too, that I would simply maintain what we'd built until my own time came. She took a small sip of cordial before continuing. These past weeks have reminded me that I'm still alive, that perhaps there might be more for me than just preserving the past. She looked at him then, her expression open and vulnerable in a way he hadn't seen before. I've grown accustomed to your presence here, Devin. To your quiet strength, your respect for what this place means to me. I would not be displeased if you chose to stay beyond our agreement. The careful phrasing made him smile. Not displeased, that's hardly a ringing endorsement. An answering smile touched her lips. Perhaps I'm being cautious. I've known grief once. It isn't an experience I'm eager to repeat. No, he agreed softly. It isn't. Their eyes held across the space between them, unspoken possibilities hanging in the air like the snowflakes suspended in the gusts outside. Neither pushed for more definition of what might lie ahead. There would be time for that after the storm, after the threat of rustlers was resolved, after the careful dance of 2 wounded hearts finding their way toward each other had reached its natural conclusion. The storm finally broke on the morning of the 4th day. They emerged from the cabin to find the world transformed, familiar landmarks buried under pristine drifts, tree branches bowed with snow, icicles hanging from the eaves like crystal daggers. The sky above was a brilliant, cloudless blue that seemed to mock the chaos the storm had left in its wake. It's beautiful, Julia breathed, taking in the sparkling landscape. And deadly if you're not prepared, Devin nodded, already assessing what needed to be done. We should check the livestock first, then clear paths to the essential buildings. The rustlers won't try anything immediately. The snow's too deep for easy movement, but they'll come. They worked through the day, shoveling paths, breaking ice from water troughs, ensuring the animals were safe and fed. By sunset, exhaustion had settled into their muscles, but the homestead was functional again. Bath, Julia declared as they finished the evening chores. For both of us. You first, while I prepare supper. The luxury of hot water after days of being snowbound was something Devin savored as he bathed in the metal tub set up behind a screen in the kitchen. Afterwards, clean-shaven and dressed in fresh clothes, he took over cooking duties while Julia enjoyed her own bath. When she emerged, her honey-brown hair hanging loose down her back to dry, Devin was momentarily struck speechless. She'd always worn her hair pinned up in practical fashion. Seeing it framing her face transformed her from the practical widow farmer to something else entirely, a young, beautiful woman whose life still held promise. "You're staring again," she observed, but this time there was a hint of pleased self-consciousness in her tone. "It suits you," he said simply. "Your hair down," Julia touched a strand self-consciously. "It's not very practical, not everything needs to be practical." She held his gaze for a moment, then nodded slightly, accepting both the compliment and the philosophy behind it. They ate dinner by lamplight, discussing their plans for the coming days. Devin was certain the rustlers would return, probably within the week once the snow had settled enough for easy travel. Julia agreed to his suggestion that they move the livestock to the smaller corral directly behind the barn, where they would be more easily defended. "I have a shotgun," she offered. "Thomas taught me to use it. I'm a fair shot." "Let's hope it doesn't come to that," Devin replied, but he was grateful to know she could defend herself if necessary. After dinner, instead of their usual separate activities, Julia suggested a game of checkers. "Thomas and I used to play in the evenings," she explained, bringing out a handmade board and pieces. "It's been a while, but I think I remember the strategy." Devin hadn't played since childhood, but the rules came back quickly. They played 2 games, Julia winning the first, Devin the second, before she stifled a yawn. "I should get some rest," she said, rising from the table. "Tomorrow will be another full day of digging out." "Julia," Devin said as she prepared to retire to her bedroom. "When this business with the rustlers is resolved, perhaps we might discuss what happens after winter, more specifically." A soft smile touched her lips. "I'd like that." 3 days later, Devin's predictions proved accurate. He was chopping wood in the late afternoon when he spotted movement at the edge of the property, the same 3 riders he'd glimpsed during the storm. This time, they made no attempt to conceal their approach, riding boldly up to the fence line and studying the homestead with calculating eyes. Devin set down his axe deliberately, making sure they saw him notice them. One rider raised a hand in mocking greeting before they turned and rode away, disappearing into the tree line to the north. "They're coming tonight," he told Julia when he returned to the cabin. "They wanted us to see them to worry about when they'll strike. It's a tactic meant to unnerve us." Julia's face paled slightly, but her voice was steady. "What do we do?" "Prepare," Devin replied simply. "They'll wait until after midnight when they think we'll be asleep. We'll be ready." As darkness fell, they made their preparations. The livestock were secured in the small corral with extra reinforcement on the gates. Lanterns were strategically placed around the property, unlit but ready. Inside the cabin, they moved furniture to create defensive positions should the worst occur. "Try to get some sleep," Devin suggested as the clock struck 9. "I'll keep watch, wake you when it's time." Julia shook her head. "I couldn't possibly sleep knowing what's coming." She touched his arm briefly. "We'll face this together." The hours passed with agonizing slowness. They spoke little, each lost in private thoughts as they waited. Occasionally their eyes would meet across the dim cabin, and something unspoken passed between them: concern, determination, and something else that neither was quite ready to name. It was just after 2 in the morning when Devin heard the soft crunch of snow under cautious hooves. He motioned to Julia, who nodded grimly and took up her position by the window with the shotgun, while he moved silently to the door, revolver in hand. Through a small gap in the curtains, he could make out 3 figures dismounting at the edge of the yard, leaving their horses ground-tied as they crept toward the barn and corral. They moved with the confidence of men who believed their quarry was sleeping, unaware of the threat. "They're heading for the livestock," he whispered to Julia. "I'm going out. If you hear gunfire, stay inside unless I call for you. Before she could protest, he slipped through the door and into the frigid night. The moon was nearly full, casting blue-white light across the snow that made concealment difficult. Devin used the shadows of buildings to work his way around to the far side of the barn, intending to come up behind the rustlers. From his new position, he could see them more clearly, rough-looking men with scarves pulled up over their faces against the cold. They were working on the corral gate, trying to remove the bar without making noise that would wake the household. One held a rifle, keeping watch, while the other two focused on the gate. Devin stepped into the open, his revolver leveled. "That's far enough, gentlemen." The men froze, then the one with the rifle swung it toward Devin. Before he could fire, the crack of a shotgun split the night air, and snow exploded at the rustler's feet. Julia stood on the cabin porch, the shotgun leveled, her white nightgown and loose hair making her look like an avenging spirit in the moonlight. "The next one won't miss," she called, her voice clear in the still night. "Drop your weapons." The rustlers exchanged glances, clearly weighing their options. Devin kept his revolver trained on them, slowly advancing. "You're outnumbered and outpositioned," he said calmly. "This doesn't need to end badly for anyone." The leader of the group, a burly man with a scar visible even above his scarf, made a decision. "We don't want trouble," he said, his voice rough. "Just looking for livestock to get us through winter. Times are hard." "Times are hard for everyone," Devin replied without lowering his weapon. "Doesn't give you the right to take what isn't yours." "You're that bounty hunter, ain't you?" one of the other men asked suddenly. "Vaughn heard you was working this area." Devin didn't confirm or deny, but he saw how the information changed the calculus in the rustlers' minds. His reputation, it seemed, still carried weight. The leader slowly lowered his rifle. "We'll be moving on. No harm done." "Not quite," Devin countered. "You'll be riding to Silver Creek in the morning, turning yourselves in to Marshal Thompson. Confess to the Peterson raid and he might go easier on you." "And if we don't?" the leader challenged, though there was less conviction in his voice now. "Then I start hunting you," Devin said simply. "And I always find who I'm looking for." The men exchanged glances again, then the leader nodded reluctantly. "Dawn will ride in, you have my word." "You'll ride in now," Julia called from the porch, surprising both Devin and the rustlers. "You can spend the night in our barn and we'll all go to town together when it's light. I have no interest in shooting anyone, but I will protect what's mine." The arrangement was made. The rustlers were disarmed and secured in an empty stall in the barn, with Devin keeping watch through what remained of the night. At dawn, they saddled up Julia, insisting on accompanying them to town despite Devin's concerns. "It's my property they threatened," she said firmly as she buttoned her coat. "I'll see this through." The ride to Silver Creek was tense but uneventful. Marshal Thompson was surprised but grateful when they arrived with the rustlers, who, faced with both Devin's reputation and the evidence against them, confessed to several thefts in the area. "You've done Silver Creek a service," Thompson told them as he locked the cell door on the three men. "These boys have been causing trouble across 3 counties." As they prepared to ride back to the homestead, Edward Montgomery emerged from the bank across the street, his eyes widening at the sight of Julia and Devin together at the marshal's office. "Mrs. Keller," he called, hurrying over. "Is everything all right? I heard there was some excitement." Julia explained what had happened, her voice calm but with an undercurrent of pride that Devin noticed with approval. She was no longer speaking as a widow in need of protection, but as a landowner who had successfully defended what was hers. Montgomery's expression shifted from concern to calculation as she spoke. "How? Fortunate that Mr. Vaughn was there to assist you. But surely this incident demonstrates what I've been saying all along: a woman alone on an isolated property faces dangers that could be avoided by selling to those better equipped to manage such holdings." Before Julia could respond, Devin stepped forward. "Mrs. Keller wasn't alone, Mr. Montgomery, and she handled herself with more courage than most men I've known." He placed himself slightly in front of Julia, a subtle but clear message of protection. "Perhaps you do better to admire her determination rather than trying to profit from what you perceive as vulnerability." The banker's face flushed with anger, but he controlled his response in the public street. "I see. Well, my offer remains open, Mrs. Keller. When you tire of fighting nature and criminals just to hold onto a memory, the bank will provide fair compensation." With a curt nod, he turned and stalked back to his establishment. "That man," Julia muttered as they mounted their horses, "has all the sensitivity of a fence post." Devin chuckled at her uncharacteristic display of temper. "He's a businessman. He sees opportunity where others see history and meaning." "He sees a woman he can bully," Julia corrected, guiding her horse alongside Devin's as they rode out of town. "But he's mistaken if he thinks I'll surrender what Thomas and I built together just because of one difficult night." They rode in companionable silence for a while, the winter sun weak but welcome on their backs. Eventually, Julia spoke again, her voice thoughtful. "I've been thinking about what you said before about discussing what happens after winter." Devin glanced at her, noting how the cold had brought color to her cheeks, how the sunlight caught in her hair where it escaped from beneath her bonnet. And I think perhaps it's time we did," she replied. "After what happened last night, life feels more precious, more immediate somehow." She met his eyes. "I don't want to live simply maintaining the past anymore, Devin. I want to honor it, but also build something new." His heart quickened at her words. "What are you saying, Julia?" She guided her horse to a stop, turning in the saddle to face him fully. "I'm saying that Thomas's letters will always be precious to me. They represent a love that shaped who I am, but perhaps there's room for new letters. New words, a new chapter that doesn't erase what came before but builds upon it." Devin reached across the space between their horses to take her gloved hand in his. "I'd like to help you write that chapter if you'll let me." Her amber eyes, so often shadowed with grief since he'd known her, now held a warmth and light he'd glimpsed only rarely. "I think I would like that very much," she said softly. They rode the rest of the way home with their hands occasionally reaching across the space between them, connecting briefly before returning to the reins like their lives, separate yet increasingly intertwined. That evening, after the chores were done and they sat before the fire sharing a simple meal, Julia rose and went to her bedroom. She returned with a small wooden box inlaid with mother-of-pearl. "This was my writing box," she explained, setting it on the table between them. "A gift from my father when I left for school. I used to write to Thomas in it during our courtship, and later, when he was establishing our claim here while I finished teaching my school term in Ohio." She opened the lid, revealing compartments for paper, envelopes, ink, and pens. Everything a person needed to capture thoughts and send them across distances. "It's beautiful," Devin said, admiring the craftsmanship. "I haven't used it since Thomas died," Julia continued, running her fingers along the smooth wood. "It felt disloyal somehow. But tonight I thought perhaps it's time to begin again." She looked up at him, a question in her eyes. "Would you write with me, Devin? Not love letters, necessarily not yet, but words to begin something new." Touched by the gesture and all it symbolized, Devin nodded. "I'd be honored." They spent the evening writing, sometimes in silence, sometimes sharing their words aloud. Julia wrote of her hopes for spring planting, her memories of Thomas that she wanted to preserve, her growing feelings for the man who had appeared on her porch that autumn day. Devin wrote of his wandering years, the peace he'd found on her homestead, his tentative dreams of putting down roots after so long adrift. As the fire burned low and the clock chimed midnight, Julia carefully folded her pages. "These aren't to be sent," she said softly. "They're for us. To mark the beginning of whatever comes next." Devin folded his own pages and handed them to her. "Keep them together," he suggested. "A record of this night, this decision." She placed all the pages in the writing box, closing the lid with a sense of ceremony. "Good night, Devin," she said, rising from the table. But instead of retreating immediately to her bedroom, she paused beside his chair and with gentle hesitation leaned down to press a soft kiss to his cheek. "Thank you for everything." Before he could respond, she was gone, the bedroom door closing quietly behind her. Devin sat for a long time afterward, his hand touching the spot where her lips had brushed his skin. feeling as though a threshold had been crossed not with passion or dramatic declaration, but with something more profound. The quiet, deliberate choice of two people who had known loss to risk hope once again. Winter deepened in the weeks that followed, bringing frigid temperatures and shorter days that kept them largely confined to the homestead. The dynamics between them had shifted subtly since the night they had written together. There was an ease in their interactions, a quiet understanding that their relationship was evolving into something neither had expected but both now welcomed. They continued to write in the evenings, sharing their thoughts sometimes, keeping them private other times. Julia began to speak more freely of Thomas, not just of missing him, but of the joy they had shared, the dreams they had built together. In turn, Devin spoke of Sarah, the woman he had courted in Cottonwood Springs, a schoolteacher with auburn hair and a quick laugh who had died before they could build a life together. She loved poetry, he told Julia one evening as they sat by the fire, snow falling gently outside the windows. Used to recite Longfellow from memory while we walked by the creek. She sounds lovely, Julia said sincerely. I wish I could have known her. She would have liked you, Devin replied with a small smile. Strong women recognize each other, I think. As Christmas approached, a festive spirit gradually overtook the cabin despite the isolation winter had imposed. Julia brought out treasured decorations from a trunk paper, ornaments, candles, a small nativity scene carved by Thomas during their first year on the homestead. Devin contributed by bringing in a small pine tree from the edge of the property, setting it up in the corner of the main room. Thomas and I always had a tree, Julia explained as they decorated it with the paper ornaments and strung cranberries. Even that first year when we had nothing, he insisted, said a home needed celebration, needed beauty. A wise man, Devin commented, watching as she carefully placed a small wooden star at the top of the tree. The simple joy on her face as she stepped back to admire their work made his heart constrict with tenderness. On Christmas Eve, Julia surprised him by producing a package wrapped in brown paper and tied with string. It isn't much, she said, suddenly shy as she handed it to him. Inside, Devin found a beautifully knitted scarf in deep blue wool. You made this, he asked, running his fingers over the even stitches. Julia nodded. I've been working on it in the afternoons while you were in the barn. The color, it matches your eyes. The thoughtfulness of the gift made by her own hands in moments stolen from her busy days moved him deeply. I have something for you too, he admitted, though I'm afraid it can't compare to this. From his pocket, he withdrew a small object wrapped in a handkerchief. Julia unwrapped it carefully to reveal a wooden carving of a wildflower, the purple blossoms that Thomas had planted near the house. Devin, she breathed, turning the delicate carving in her hands. It's beautiful. When did you make this? In the evenings, after you'd gone to bed, he explained. I'm not as skilled as Thomas was with woodworking, but I wanted you to have something that would last through winter, a reminder that spring will come again. Tears welled in her eyes as she cradled the carving. Thank you, she whispered. Then, with a deliberateness that made his heart race, she leaned forward and pressed her lips to his, not on the cheek this time, but a proper kiss, gentle but unmistakable in its meaning. When she pulled back, her cheeks were flushed, her eyes questioning. Devin reached up to touch her face, his thumb brushing away a tear that had escaped. Julia, he said softly, I never expected to find this. He gestured to encompass the cabin, the homestead, the life they had been building together. When I rode into Silver Creek, I was still running from memories, from connections, from putting down roots anywhere. But you, he smiled. You and your letters and your determination to honor the past while still facing forward, you've changed everything. She leaned into his touch, her eyes never leaving his. I was so lost after Thomas died, I thought I would simply exist, maintaining what we'd built until my own time came. I never imagined feeling this way again, hopeful, alive. Her voice dropped to a whisper. Loved, you are, he assured her. You are so deeply loved. This time when they kissed, it was with the certainty of people who had found in each other not replacement for what they had lost, but new possibility that honored all that had come before. Christmas Day dawned bright and clear. the sun turning the snow-covered landscape into a dazzling expanse of white. They exchanged no further gifts beyond what they had shared the night before, but the day held a special quality, nonetheless, a sense of new beginning, of possibilities unfolding. As the winter weeks passed and January gave way to February, they fell into new patterns. The distinction between employer and employee had long since faded, replaced by partnership in all things. They planned spring planting together, discussed improvements to the homestead, even began to imagine expansion, perhaps a new field cleared to the east, maybe in addition to the cabin. In town, people noticed the change. Julia no longer referred to Devin as Mr. Vaughn, who is helping me through winter, but simply as Devin. They arrived together at church services, sat side by side at community gatherings. Gossip inevitably followed, but it was largely good-natured. The widow Keller deserved happiness, most agreed, and the former bounty hunter seemed genuinely devoted to her. Only Edward Montgomery continued to press his case for buying her land, becoming more insistent as winter began to wane and signs of early spring appeared. "He approached me again yesterday," Julia told Devin one evening in early March as they sat on the porch, enjoying an unseasonably warm evening. "Increased his offer considerably. Said the railroad has confirmed they'll be expanding the line through Silver Creek by next year." Devin frowned. "That explains his persistence. Land values will soar when the railroad comes through." "He implied that refusing would be foolish," Julia continued, her voice tight with indignation. "Said a sensible widow would take the money and move somewhere more suitable for a woman alone." "You're not alone," Devin pointed out, taking her hand. "No," she agreed, smiling at him. "I'm not," which I informed Mr. Montgomery in no uncertain terms. "I wish I could have seen his face," Devin chuckled. "It was quite a sight," Julia admitted with a small laugh. "Especially when I told him that not only would I not be selling, but that we would be expanding operations this year. His expression when I said we was rather priceless." Devin squeezed her hand. "So you've decided then, about the future?" Julia turned to face him fully, her amber eyes reflecting the sunset. "I have. This is my home, our home, if you want it to be. I can think of nothing better than building on what Thomas and I started, creating something new while honoring what came before." She paused, suddenly vulnerable. "If that's what you want too." Devin had been carrying a question in his heart for weeks, waiting for the right moment. Somehow he knew this was it. "Julia," he said softly, "I've wandered since the war, never finding a place that felt like home. Until I found you, reading those old letters on your porch. You've given me something I never thought I'd have again: purpose, peace, love." He took both her hands in his. "I don't want to be your hired hand or even just your partner. I want to be your husband if you'll have me." Tears welled in Julia's eyes, but they were tears of joy. "Yes," she whispered. "Yes, Devin, I would be honored to be your wife." As March turned to April, the homestead came alive with new activity. Fields were plowed and planted, fruit trees pruned, buildings repaired and improved. Devin and Julia worked side by side, planning not just for the coming season but for years ahead, their future together. The wedding was set for May, when Julia's wildflowers would be in bloom. They wanted a simple ceremony, just close friends from town and the minister. No elaborate preparations, nothing to distract from the meaning of the day. One evening, as sunset painted the sky in shades of gold and pink, Julia found Devin sitting on the porch, writing in a leather-bound journal she hadn't seen before. "What are you writing?" she asked, settling beside him on the bench. Devin smiled, closing the journal but keeping his place with one finger. "A letter," he said. "To you." Julia's eyebrows rose in surprise. "To me, but I'm right here." "I know." He reopened the journal, turning it so she could see the pages filled with his neat, deliberate handwriting. "I started this the day after Christmas. I write in it every few days things I want to remember, things I want you to know." Curious, Julia began to read the page he had opened. "April 12, 1879, my dearest Julia, today as we planted the vegetable garden, I watched you kneel in the soil, your hands working the earth with such care and purpose, and I was struck again by how fortunate I am to have found you. You spoke of your plans for preserving the harvest, of jars of tomatoes and beans that would see us through next winter. And in that moment, I could see our future stretching before us, not just one season, but many years of building this life together. When I think of how close I came to riding past Silver Creek without stopping, how I might have continued my restless wandering and never known the joy of loving you, I am humbled by the workings of fate or providence that led me to your porch that autumn day. Thomas once wrote to you of building a kingdom from raw land. I understand now what he meant. What you and I are creating here isn't just a farm or a homestead, it's a home in the deepest sense of the word, a place where love dwells, where memories are honored and new ones created each day. Tomorrow we'll finish planting the north field, and you mentioned wanting to begin preparations for the wedding. Simple ones, you insisted, nothing elaborate. But I see how your eyes light up when you speak of that day, and I want you to know that I would give you the grandest wedding in Wyoming territory if that would bring you joy. That I would give you anything within my power to give. Until tomorrow and all the tomorrows after, Devin Julia looked up from the page, tears shimmering in her eyes. You've been writing me love letters all this time, Devin nodded, somewhat self-conscious. I remember what you said about Thomas, how he expressed himself best on paper. I thought perhaps someday these might mean something to you, the way his letters do. Oh, Devin, Julia whispered, touching his face gently, they already do, more than I can say. She leaned forward to kiss him tenderly. When you found me that day, reading Thomas's old letters, and you said we might write new ones together, I never imagined how literally you meant it. I want to leave something behind, Devin admitted, something that shows how much I loved you in case. He didn't finish the thought, but he didn't need to. They both understood the fragility of life, how quickly everything could change. We'll write them together, Julia decided, taking his hand. New letters, new memories, a record of our life for whoever comes after us. For our children, perhaps, Devin suggested tentatively. They hadn't spoken specifically of children, knowing Julia's history of loss, her eyes softened at his words. Perhaps, she agreed. I would like to try if we are blessed that way. She looked out over the homestead, the fields newly planted, the fruit trees beginning to bud. This land should know children's laughter again. On their wedding day in mid-May, Julia's wildflowers bloomed in profusion around the cabin. The ceremony was simple but deeply moving. Julia in a new blue dress, Devin in his best shirt and vest. Their friends gathered in the yard to witness their vows. Marshall Thompson stood as Devin's best man, while Hiram Walker's wife Alice attended Julia. As they exchanged rings, simple bands purchased on a trip to Cheyenne, Julia felt Thomas's presence not as a shadow over her happiness, but as a benevolent witness, approving of the new life she was building. The small wooden cross marking his grave was visible from where they stood, decorated with fresh wildflowers she had placed that morning. I take you, Julia, to be my wife, Devin said, his voice steady as he held her hands. To walk beside you through all seasons, to honor the past that shaped you, and to build our future together one day at a time. I promise to love you with constancy and devotion for all the days of my life. Julia's voice trembled slightly as she responded, I take you, Devin, to be my husband. To share with you this land and home, to blend our separate journeys into one path forward, and to love you with my whole heart for as long as we both shall live. Where once I thought my capacity for love was buried with the past, you have shown me that the heart can expand to embrace new joy without diminishing treasured memories. There wasn't a dry eye in the gathering as the minister pronounced them husband and wife. As Devin kissed his bride, a gentle breeze stirred the wildflowers, sending their scent wafting through the yard like a blessing. The small reception that followed was filled with laughter and good wishes. Even Edward Montgomery made an appearance, grudgingly offering congratulations while pointedly not renewing his offer to buy their land. His wife, a kinder soul than her husband, presented them with a fine tablecloth as a wedding gift. As evening fell and the last guests departed, Devin and Julia stood on their porch, arms around each other as they watched the sunset paint the western sky in breathtaking hues of orange and purple. Mrs. Vaughn, Devin murmured, pressing a kiss to her temple. How does it sound? Julia smiled, leaning into his embrace, like the beginning of a wonderful story. She turned in his arms to face him. Thomas once told me that the greatest gift in life is to love deeply and be loved in return. I've been blessed to know that gift twice in one lifetime. And I once thought I'd never know it again after Cottonwood Springs, Devin replied. Yet here we are. As darkness settled over the homestead, their home, their future, Devin led his bride inside. On the writing desk in the corner sat two journals, the one in which he had been writing his letters to Julia, and a new one, bound in soft leather, its pages blank and waiting. For us, Julia said, noticing his gaze on the journals, to write our story together. The first chapter begins tonight, Devin agreed, drawing her close. And so it did, as two people who had known profound loss found in each other the courage to love again. To blend past and present into a future neither had imagined possible when a wandering cowboy found a widow reading old letters on her porch and said, "Let's write new ones together." Over the years that followed, their story unfolded across the pages of many journals. They recorded the expansion of their farm, the birth of their daughter Rose Alice in the spring of 1881, followed by twin boys Thomas and James 2 years later. They wrote of droughts and bountiful harvests, of the railroad's arrival that brought prosperity to Silver Creek, of the community that grew around them as more settlers arrived. Devin never returned to bounty hunting, finding deeper satisfaction in working the land and raising his family. Julia's skill with preserves and baked goods led to a small but profitable business selling to the growing town. Together, they built a legacy on the foundation Thomas had established, not erasing what came before, but honoring it as they created something new. And always, on clear autumn evenings when the light turned golden, they would sit together on the porch, reading their collected letters to each other, a testament to the power of love to heal, to renew, and to write new chapters even after the most painful endings. For in those letters, written with care and preserved with devotion, they found the truth they had both discovered on a fateful autumn day in 1878. That the heart's capacity for love is boundless, and that sometimes the most beautiful stories are those written after we think the book has closed.